Politics with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. Up to now, the Epstein saga has been a story of sexual depravity by reckless men and the seductive power of big money. But now, with the latest revelations from the Epstein files, this modern morality tale enters the world of power politics. There's Peter Mandelson, who last night quit the Labour Party. Keir Starmer has called on him to leave the House of Lords as well. Also today, jaw-dropping allegations of leaks from the heart of Downing Street during the financial crisis and calls from opposition leaders Kemi Badenoch and Stephen Flynn of the SNP for criminal investigation into Lord Mandelson. We'll discuss him in more detail later in the show. But let me begin tonight with something that I think is even more important, even more extraordinary. Growing suspicions of a Russian connection. Epstein had apparently limitless supplies of money. Where did it come from? He procured many young Russian girls. Why was that so easy for him? The files released show more than 1,000 documents which referred to Vladimir Putin, and 9,000 referring to Moscow. The FBI says that he was Putin's wealth manager. Epstein filed all of his messages. He filmed and taped powerful Western leaders in deeply compromising situations. Why? Doesn't it make you wonder at least about the possibility of a KGB operation big enough to ensnare former presidents and prime ministers and the leaders of some of the world's most powerful companies? I know, this all sounds impossibly sensational, conspiratorial, a James Bond villain plot in real life. But there is so much smoke billowing out of one of the most extraordinary establishment crises in my lifetime that it is well worth exploring whether there might be also a genuinely ominous backstory. All day, Keir Starmer's government has been scrambling to keep up. Here's the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, Darren Jones, in the Commons about an hour ago.
Peter Mandelson must account for his actions and conduct. It is an understatement, Madam Deputy Speaker, to say that his decision to continue a close relationship with a convicted paedophile, including discussing private government business, falls far below the standards expected of any minister. His behaviour was unequivocally wrong and an insult to the women and girls who suffered. The Prime Minister believes, as does the government, that Peter Mandelson should not retain his membership of the House of Lords or use his title.
Well, let's begin tonight with Misha Glenny, author of McMafia, a journey through the global criminal underworld, and a journalist who specialises in cybersecurity and Russian affairs. Misha, great to have you breaking your duck on this show. I laid out there some of the circumstantial evidence which might point to a Russian connection of some substance. I haven't joined the dots, but do you think these are dots worth looking at?
I certainly think they're worth looking at. I would also place, before I get into the Russian stuff, place it into the broader context of the extraordinary international network that Epstein had developed, which we were first alerted to with the previous release of documents. A lot to do with Central Europe and far-right movements in Central Europe. A lot linking Epstein to Steve Bannon, the former chief of staff for Trump during his first administration. A lot to do with India, Israel, and now to do with Russia as well. The Russian material is, at the moment, I have to say, circumstantial,
yes,
except for certain emails that Epstein sent in particular to his contact, Sergei Belyakov, who was at the time, this is in 2015 and before, was Russia's Deputy Minister of Economic Development. But Belyakov did have contacts to the FSB, it is thought. He graduated from the FSB Intelligence Academy, so he would have been connected. And they discuss about providing women for various men in the United States. That's a classic FSB tactic, the honey trap. So there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, certainly.
And Misha, from what you've seen so far, we think that Epstein met Putin, perhaps on several occasions, but we don't have hard evidence of that, do we?
No, we don't. And until we have hard evidence, I'm very reluctant to suggest that this might have taken place simply because there is so much rumor and half-truths around Epstein. And we know, of course, that half of the documentation that the Justice Department in the US holds has still not been released. And a lot of the material has been so heavily redacted, yes, you can't really work out what's going on.
I mean, on the one hand, it's very dangerous to blame the Russians for everything going wrong in the world. On the other hand, there are stories which, although they're completely implausible, turn out to be true. Epstein's also connected to Mossad through the connection with Robert Maxwell and all of that. And again, there are suggestions that not only was he a financial advisor to Putin, but also to Robert Mugabe. So these tentacles go in every direction.
They do. That's what's so interesting is that he seemed to be a really effective one-man pander to the community that grew up around the time of McMafia, of corrupt politicians and increasingly autocratic politicians who wanted to deal with each other and wanted to gain all the benefits from it, like money, power, and also access to women. So he seems to have set himself up as a global power broker, and there are few countries or politicians who he didn't have contacts with at some point or another.
Yeah, you mentioned, Michel, a moment ago, the Eastern European connection and Steve Bannon and the involvement of all those far-right parties. Just tell us a little bit more about those and Epstein.
Well, one of the biggest victims so far victims is the wrong word. One of the biggest people to fall so far is a man named Miroslav Lajcek, who I know well because for many years he was the EU's envoy to the Western Balkans, trying to discuss the possibility of integrating the Western Balkans into the European Union. He is the national security advisor of Robert Fico, the Slovak prime minister, who is a leading far-right figure in Europe. And Lajcek was deeply involved both with the Bannon connection, facilitating Bannon's access to various people in Europe, but also discussing in a rather distasteful fashion women with Epstein himself. So there's that. Bannon was also using Epstein to get in touch with the former Austrian Prime Minister Sebastian Kurz, another populist. And also, interestingly enough, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi used Epstein in order to try and ingratiate himself with various key people in Washington, including Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law.
These ripples just carry on going further and further and further. What a jaw-dropping story. Misha Glennie, thank you very, very much indeed for that. I want to turn now to a man who knows more about Epstein than almost anybody else does, Barry Levine. He's the author of The Spider, Inside the Tangled Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Barry, great to have you on the show again. I'd be very interested in your reflections on the connections between Epstein, it appears through these files, and the Russians and Mossad and various other figures around the world. This is a global story now.
There's no question that this is a global story, and as we continue to go through the documents, we learn more and more. And of course, Jeffrey Epstein was a collector of people. The more powerful, the better. And these people came from the political world, the financial world, and particularly he really pursued people that could do him favors. And with the Russians, of course, you have to understand that Jeffrey Epstein was moving a lot of money through Russian banks. Senator Ron Wyden here in Washington has been going down that financial road There was more than $1 billion in suspicious wire transfers, money moved through not only American banks, but Russian banks. And so right now, those finances are being unraveled. But from a practical point of view, Jeffrey Epstein used political currency to, I believe, entrap individuals, to compromise those individuals, and to blackmail individuals. And
so, sorry to jump in. In a sense, it doesn't need to be the KGB. It could just be Jeffrey Epstein himself doing the honey trap, the compromat, and the blackmail.
That's correct. And he went out of his way at the time of President Trump's first election or first time in office in 2016 to offer, and we know this from emails in the files, to offer his expertise about Donald Trump to Russian officials. He was pursuing an interview. He was pursuing a meeting with Putin to speak about Trump. Now, we don't know if that ever occurred, but we do know that he viewed what he knew about not only Trump, but about former President Clinton as political currency. And he certainly, without question, had connections related to the incoming girls, that many of them came from Russia. He used modeling fixers to transport these girls overseas for his sex trafficking operation, not only for himself, but for very powerful individuals, at least 20 men that we are aware of that the FBI looked into.
Well, I found your book pretty extraordinary when it came out, but I have to say I'm even more aghast at some of the latest revelations. But for now, thank you very, very much indeed for talking to LBC. Because when I say this is a political story, I am also talking about the astonishing leak of highly market-sensitive emails from the heart of Number 10 during the years when Peter Mandelson was a minister working for Gordon Brown. I'm joined now by the tax expert, Dan Needle. Dan, great to have you on the show. Like you, I have looked through all of these revelations from Peter Mandelson and the replies from Jeffrey Epstein, and to call this market-sensitive is understatement, isn't it?
Yes. It's probably not market sensitive in the insider trading sense of specific stocks. It was never about that. It's about geopolitics. It's about the markets as a whole. It's information which Epstein's contacts in New York would no doubt have found very valuable. And Peter Mandelson sends it casually across to him, taking 4 seconds to do so in one case, 4 seconds between receiving a Number 10 email and flicking it right across to Epstein.
And this includes, for instance, tipping him off about a 500 billion euro reflation package, which was highly market sensitive, you'd think.
I mean, the markets probably knew it was coming, but Mandelson's confidence that it would be signed that evening, which turned out to be correct, is quite something to share with a third party.
Dan, neither of us are lawyers, but do you think this is criminal behaviour?
I'm a lawyer, but I'm not that kind of lawyer.
Not that kind of lawyer.
I can tell you that there is a more than frivolous argument that this breaches the law, that there's a criminal offence of misconduct in public office, which I am not a specialist in, but I very much hope the CPS are considering whether it's applicable here.
Now, obviously, Lord Mandelson himself, as we still call him, would deny elements of that and deny that. Nonetheless, there is absolute molten anger among other people who worked for Gordon Brown at the time about what he did. The advisors have been very, very angry about it. Ministers are really angry about it. Is this a sort of an egregious breach of trust of a kind that you haven't seen before?
I was around at the time. I was a partner at an international law firm advising banks on many of these events. And we knew there was lots of lobbying going on. But the idea that banks were getting tipped off from someone within Number 10 for a minister, that's extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary.
I mean, he was an absolutely crucial minister at the time. And for instance, when he says to Jamie Dimon of Morgan, the very, very powerful, very outspoken, quite aggressive alpha male American banker, gives him advice and says, you can be a bit aggressive with these people, you can threaten them a bit. And then we read from Alistair Darling, who was Chancellor at the time, in his memoirs, that Diamond was straight on the phone making exactly the kind of threats that Peter Mandelson was recommending. And you begin to wonder, on whose side? You don't wonder. You ask yourself, on whose side was Peter Mandelson actually acting at the time when he was a member of the Crown, a Minister of the Crown?
Well, it seems clear there he was on Jamie Dimon's side.
Yeah.
He was telling Jamie Dimon to mildly threaten. In fact, Jeffrey Epstein seemed a bit taken aback at that. Epstein was suggesting something milder, but it looks like the mildly threatened suggestion made it through to Jamie Dimon.
I think almost everybody agrees now there's no way back for Peter Mandelson. But who else?
How many times have you said that, Andrew?
Sorry?
How many times have you said that in the past?
That's a very, very good point. Yet again, there's no way back until then. But I think this time really is that the door has been bolted and shut and locked and nailed and chained and the rest of it. We'll see. But let me ask you about Keir Starmer, because Keir Starmer, after all, appointed him as ambassador at a time when this wasn't known, but there were lots of rumours, there were lots of suspicions about Lord Mandelson. The Prime Minister is now saying that he wants him to step down from the House of Lords. But do you think the Labour Party generally can have clean hands when it comes to Peter Mandelson, or are they also implicated in what's happened?
Gosh, I am a lawyer, I'm afraid, not a politician, not a political commentator, so I'm going to duck that one, Andrew.
Duck away, but you didn't duck the rest of it, so Dan Needle, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, it's important in all of this not to lose sight of the victims who were harmed so badly by Epstein, and we'll be talking about them in the next few minutes with one of the leading campaigners against sexual abuse. 6:20. There has been only one story in town at Westminster today, culminating in a very heated session in the Commons after the government was forced to the dispatch box to answer questions about Peter Mandelson. Our deputy political editor, Aggie Chambray, is here with all the latest. A fascinating series of exchanges on Mandelson in the Commons, I thought.
A fascinating series of exchanges, that's absolutely right. And the implication from the government that Peter Mandelson, lied before his appointment, which, as you know, is a very serious accusation, especially when standing at the dispatch box. Now, I was speaking to the government and they say there's no change of line, just that Mandelson would not have been appointed if all the information we now have was available at the time. So they say they're not necessarily accusing him of lying, but that is very much what it sounded like. Emily Thornberry, to the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, saying Mandelson should be investigated by the police. I think the first Labour politician and a very senior one.
Because the SNP, I think Plaid Cymru,
Indeed.
the Conservative Party,
the Liberal Democrats,
everybody's piling in on this now.
Everybody. I think, I'm not sure the Conservatives have said it yet, but the others have very much.
Kemi Badenoch, I heard saying something quite similar anyway.
Brilliant. So they are all basically saying this and going quite far. The SNP have written to the Met Police too, demanding a probe. So all the other parties coalescing around that. We now have very senior Labour politicians like Emily Thornberry saying that too.
And it's right, is it not, that Keir Starmer can say, I want you to step down from the House of Lords, Peter Mandelson, but saying it and actually getting it to happen is a very, very different thing. It's very difficult to get somebody out of the House of Lords unless they want to go. That's
exactly right. So Downing Street basically saying today that Peter Mandelson should not be a member of the House of Lords or use the title. But the Prime Minister doesn't actually have the power to strip him of his peerage. There are various laws that there is one committee that could actually do it, but that is quite difficult to put into place. And one of the things that Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, was saying in the Commons, that he basically wants the Tories, he wants this cross-party consensus to change the law so that they would be able to strip people of their peerages easier in the sort of so-called other place. Now, whether or not that will happen, not completely clear. There is a way to do it in the Commons. It would probably take an entire day, but Darren Jones said we've got enough legislation piling up.
Let me put to you the question I put to Dan Needle, who quite rightly reverse ferreted at speed and said, no, not for me. But I think it is for you. How badly damaged do you think Keir Starmer and the government are by this?
It's a really good question. I've been asking Labour MPs that all day, and they're not completely sure. I think one of them said to me, it's helpful that some of the worst stuff about this is actually about his time in Gordon Brown's government, and that it is so bad in their opinion that they actually think that is potentially helpful to Keir Starmer. But even they said they weren't completely sure yet, and I'm sure there will be days and days and days of this.
And Gordon Brown himself, decoding his words, always important to do, seems to be blazingly angry and is calling for the Cabinet Secretary to launch an investigation into all of this. Nick Butler, who was one of his close advisors at the time, again, absolutely furious.
Indeed, because it was Nick Butler's note, special advisor note, that seeming was leaked to Jeffrey Epstein, and he's put out a statement basically saying he's shocked and disgusted by the breach of trust, and said there should be a full inquiry too. Gordon Brown too said he actually contacted the government in September and tried to start an investigation then. At the time they said there was no record of any communication between the two of them, but yeah, it seems like he is very, very, very angry about this. So
maybe perhaps the main charge against the current government is not being soft or whatever, but being remarkably naive.
I think that is part of it. I mean, they are obviously worried because, this situation would be better for the government had he not quite recently been chosen as their ambassador, when there were concerns from lots of people around them for that appointment to take place. But obviously the story is so much bigger now that they are hoping for a few days at least they can hide behind that.
Well, let's see if they can. Aggie, for now, thank you very much indeed. Because in among the discussion and the scandal around the powerful men at the heart of this story, we mustn't forget the victims of Epstein's crimes, who suffered so greatly and whose lives were turned upside down. One of the strongest voices in Parliament campaigning against sexual abuse against women is Natalie Fleet, the Labour MP for Bolsover. And Natalie, you're with me now. Thank you very much for coming in. I've been talking all evening about the scandal and the connections and the possible Russian connection and stuff. And, in a sense, we haven't been talking about the victims, and we should have been. This huge slew of emails and information pouring out is not necessarily very good for some of the victims, is it?
No, not at all. There are people up and down the country, women in our country and beyond, that are looking at what happens now, and they're seeing how the victims are treated. And I don't think there's anything about how these victims are being treated that is going to make any woman more likely to come forward. So we've had this huge dump of Epstein files, and in amongst that, some of the victims, the survivors' anonymity hasn't been protected. There's all sorts redacted in those documents, but their details haven't been. So they've been exposed. And what we see with women is that when they are anonymous, people say, we should listen to them. This man did this, it was horrible, and he's convicted. And isn't this awful? The minute you start to put meat on the bones and you speak about the woman's name and what she wore and who she texted and how she dressed and how she looked and whether she was pretty or not, then we start talking and changing the conversation about whether it was actually her fault. In this story, what we're having is the women are just removed altogether. A journalist has just texted me to ask me if I think that Morgan McSweeney should resign over this. Morgan McSweeney has never met one of those victims. These victims have been through hell. And I just want to mention that one of the victims gave her full testimony of what happened to her and the hell she was put through, the hell she lived with afterwards. And then she felt that she had no choice but to take her own life. This is what victims live with every day, and the stories are caused by men, covered up by men, reported by men that bring women's voices into it. This is what's important.
Do you think there's been something sort of mildly salacious about the way this has been dealt with? All these photographs, OK, faces are blacked out, but in a sense, the humanity, the real human emotional effect of what actually happened has been put to one side. And again, we're talking about a political story only.
Yes. As you did a great introduction, but you spoke about the political impact on the Labour Party. Is this going to be a problem for Keir Starmer? Does Keir Starmer care enough about women and girls and violence against them? I want to say that I feel strongly that there are two types of men that I've had in my life. One, that cause damage, and two, that pick it up I'd be wrong not to name drop my husband here. He raises the children. He is a very good man, but so is the Prime Minister. He genuinely wants to solve violence against women and girls. He's spent his career prosecuting. So the men involved, they're great, most of them. But they shouldn't be part of the story. Right now, we are just talking about Peter Mandelson, a man who I grew up looking up to, a man who is a lord, who has a position of power, who is very happy to say, well, I'm gay, so I didn't see the worst of it. What this story tells to me is that it does not matter if you are a Labour Party MP. It does not matter if you are a Prince of the United Kingdom. It doesn't matter whether you've never visited London in your life and you're not involved in politics and you don't vote. A quarter of women in this country are raped by men that we know, that we live amongst, that are our friends. We've got to call it out, and we've got to get to a system where women can tell their truth, be respected, report it, and be believed.
And if you're a man who cares at all about this, if you are Andrew Mountbatten Windsor or if you are Peter Mandelson, therefore you should go and give testimony about this and tell the American authorities everything you know to help the women involved.
Yes, yes, yes. If you are there when you think some dodgy stuff is happening in the pub this weekend, call it out. If there is stuff that you saw and you're not sure about that happened all these years later, or you're sure there's nothing to say, go and tell the police that. We need men to be our allies and call this out. And I would like Peter Mandelson to go further. I would like him to leave the Lords as well.
And you mentioned Keir Starmer a moment ago. You thought a very, very different kind of man. I've been suggesting that he has been naive, but I suppose if the worst is that Peter Mandelson told him something and he believed it, he wouldn't be the only one.
No, absolutely. And I'm a mum to boys and I want them to be allies. I'm so proud of them, and I speak to them about consent and about what a good relationship looks like, and more of those conversations are happening. But we have friends and relatives who are rapists. The stats tell us that. There's no hiding from it. Do we want to believe it? No. Is it important that we have these conversations and we believe the worst when we're told? Then yes. Keir Starmer has the information now and he is rightly acting upon it.
So out of this horrible, horrible situation, some good might come.
Some good can come if we show the victims respect, if we believe them when they're heard, whether they're ones on the international stage like this, or whether they're a woman in our community, a friend or relative that's brave enough to tell us her truth. Because as women, we carry these stories with us every day. We see the reaction and the way that one man blames another man and another man denies it and blames another man. None of that makes us any more likely to come forward. Well,
it's been an evening of really important conversations, but this might have been the most important of all. Natalie Fleet, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Coming up, Gorton and Denton would traditionally be a safe Labour seat, but the fragmenting of British politics in the polls is putting popularity there at risk. I'll be talking to a former Conservative minister under Boris Johnson who defected to reform next. But the time now, 6:31, and Matt Hewitt has your news headlines.
A cabinet minister's told the Commons Lord Mandelson must account for his actions, as his behaviour fell far below the standards expected for any minister.
In Britain's Conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
Now, everyone I talk to agrees on this. The Denton and Gorton by-election coming later this month will be hugely significant for British politics. What they can't agree on is exactly what that significance will be. There is clearly huge anger in what used to be a safe Labour seat. Reform is widely expected to seize it, but the Greens are also said to be surging. Which party does better will shape the argument about whether Keir Starmer needs to turn further to his right or to his left. At the worst for him, the result might bring an early challenge to his own position. But the shape of what is next for Britain depends heavily on how the right, the Conservatives and Reform deal with one another. Now, it's a tricky question, and to help me tonight I'm joined by Nadine Dorries, one of several leading supporters of Boris Johnson back in the day, who now sails under the turquoise banner. Welcome, Nadine. Can I ask you, first of all, we've been talking just now about women and the treatment of women in the media. I know that you have been a great campaigner for Lucy Letby, and I just wondered if you want to share your thoughts about the documentary that's just about to come and to land, and about which her parents in particular are really worried.
It's not so much they're worried. I am concerned about the documentary. And the reason why my concern is rooted in the fact that Cheshire Police went out to tender to a number of media companies, asking them to bid to get access to police information, access to the prosecutors in order to make this documentary. Now, we pay for the police. And what we've seen as a result of the trailers just for this documentary is
pretty intrusive.
Yeah, very intrusive, and body cam footage that that the jury didn't even get access to. And yet there's been a tender process to give it to a documentary company. In this case, it was ITN who made it. And I find that quite concerning. Also, there's a point already in the trailer which has highlighted the treatment that Lucy received in court. So the police are seen arresting her in bed in her nightie. In court, she was asked by the prosecutor, Nick Johnson, what were you wearing when you were arrested? Lucy replied, her nightwear. She was then attacked and told, no, you weren't. You were wearing a tracksuit. You're trying to get sympathy for yourself, aren't you? You're an attention seeker. And she was a literally barrage line of attack, which was made to make her look bad to the jury, make her look like she was a liar to the jury. When in fact, now we know as a result of this.
She was right. Absolutely.
She was right, wearing her nightwear. Well, so in a way, John and Sue Letby, they're a very private couple. They never would seek a media attention. They've lived in the same home, the same cul-de-sac for 40 years. They are utterly appalled that this footage of the inside of their home has been released without their consent, without them even being informed. And, in their own words, they won't be watching the documentary because if they did, it would probably kill both of them.
Well, it's a very, very extraordinary thing to do. I think a very unpleasant thing for anyone to do. Let me turn to where we started, which is the Conservative Party and reform. There's Denton and Gorton by-election. There's the local elections across England, including Birmingham. There's Wales. There's Scotland. This is going to be a massive year for reform. It's going to be a massive year for the right of British politics generally. And we've got the Conservatives now planning how to win people back from reform and what their strategy should be. Do you think there is the slightest chance of your new party and your old party joining hands before a general election?
Well, I see you didn't actually mention there, Andrew, that Keir Starmer has also cancelled elections for millions of voters across the country, for which he will have to be answerable very shortly. I mean, talk about running scared. It's the most extraordinary event I think I've seen in a democratic event I've seen, certainly in my time in Westminster.
I should say, Nadine, we have covered this at some length, including with Steve Reid, and given him a reasonably hard time about it. But carry on.
Oh, good. Well done. Okay, well then, just want to make that point just in case. So do I see a point at which the right will unite? Well, I think if there were ever a time when we were facing the country being governed by an unholy alliance of the Labour Party and the Green Party, led by a man who used to charge women to hypnotise them in order to increase the size of their breasts, and the Liberal Democrats and the SNP, and what would basically be a far-left alliance, then I see a situation whereby the right would be put in a position where it would have to unite. And I think that's the right thing to happen. Will it happen now? I don't think so.
Could it happen under the leadership of Kemi Badenoch?
I doubt it.
So she would have to go to one side. So we'll see. I guess in the end, the numbers will answer that question. I mean, it has been said, and forgive me, that reform has been a bit of a boys' club. Do you think with yourself, with Suella Braverman and others now joining, that has ended?
No, I don't think it. So I know, I can understand where that's come from. The way I've been treated by reform, the way I've been welcomed by reform, and the openness that Nigel has towards wanting to get more women in, and actually his almost pursuit of more female-friendly policies within the party, and his realisation that women make up 52% of the population is not something I've ever questioned. And so I've never had the feeling then it's a boys' club. And in fact, one of the first things Nigel spoke to me about when I was defecting was, we need more women. We need to get more women into reform. How do we attract more women over? We want to get more policies out that affect women and impact women's lives. So I've never had that feeling that I was in a boys' club. I can tell you, there were times in the Conservative Party when I had that feeling, but I haven't had it in reform.
You are part of what I might call Boris Johnson's shield wall, as it were, real strong supporters. And quite a lot of those people have now gone to reform. Do you think there's the slightest chance that Johnson himself will eventually jump ship?
Absolutely none whatsoever.
None whatsoever. He stays where he is.
Yeah.
And looking ahead to obviously this is a by-election which is very, very important to the party. There are some signs, I don't want to overstate this, but there are some signs that Reform's rise has stopped and you're beginning to dip a bit. So how important in terms of momentum is this by-election for Reform?
Well, I think you know as well as I do, Andrew, that that's not true, because what we're talking about in these dips that people are absolutely seizing on, particularly left-wing journalists, it's something between 0.5% and 1%, which is well within a margin anyway. So the margin of error anyway in polling. So which I think is at 2%, is it not 2 to 3%? So it isn't. And I think if you saw some polls that came out the weekend, they're certainly well ahead. So, what I've always said in answer to this question is we do have Labour have given us some elections in May. And when you see Nigel Farage hit the campaign trail, then I think you'll see those polls increase even further and become even more significant. And of course, the significance is in how long Reform sustain that poll lead. You can argue...
Yeah, it's been quite a while now. Nadine will be watching very, very closely. It's going to be an enormously exciting spring ahead. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. But back to our top story now. We've been largely talking about the ramifications of the release of the Epstein files here in Westminster for obvious reasons. But make no mistake, Washington, D.C. is reeling with these revelations as well. And our correspondent there, Simon Marks, is here to give us an insight. Jobs, reputations are all tumbling in London at the moment. Simon, what's going on in Washington?
Well, we're not seeing quite the same fervour here, Andrew, and indeed the President of the United States, as you will know, over the weekend declared himself absolved as a result of the publication of those 3 million pages of Epstein documents on Friday. It's not entirely clear that he can lay claim to absolution. There are questions that arise as a result of some of the claims that have emerged from those documents, but they are claims about the President's conduct provided to the Department of Justice by tipsters, people who contacted the Department of Justice and made a series of accusations about Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump. We do not know whether any of those were investigated, whether they were ruled out, nor do we understand why prosecutors put that summary list together of all of the allegations that had been ranged against the President. That's one of the reasons why Democrats are calling for even more documents to be released. They say that there's another 3 million that the Department of Justice has held back. The DOJ says that's to protect victims and also to protect the integrity of what they say are ongoing investigations based on new information about Jeffrey Epstein. But the victims themselves are not happy. Their lawyers are saying that in thousands of documents, you can either find the victim's identity or piece it together due to a failed redaction system.
Well, that is indeed what we've been talking about here. How intense is the determination in Congress to get Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and Peter Mandelson in front of them?
I think it's intense. I mean, certainly we know already, as far as Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor is concerned, they want him to testify and have for a long time. But now, of course, Lord Mandelson having these substantial questions to answer about the nature of his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein has put himself, back in the Klieg lights here in Washington, D.C., a city that he only just left as a result of him being removed from his post as British ambassador. So, yes, I think there is definitely a determination for those hearings to take place if either man would agree to participate.
Simon Marks, fascinating as always. Keep us in touch, please, and thank you for tonight. Now, coming up, birth rates are falling in the United Kingdom, and with them, the numbers of pupils in our schools. But what impact might that have on the education system itself, which is already, of course, struggling with underfunding? We'll talk about that soon, but the time now, 6:45.
Coming up tonight with Andrew Marr on LBC.
6:47. I spoke a little earlier about that heated session in the Commons this afternoon as the government was forced to answer MPs' questions about the revelations into Lord Mandelson's links to Jeffrey Epstein. I'm joined now by two MPs who were there, Clive Efford, the Labour MP for Eltham and Chislehurst, and Liz Saville-Roberts, the leader of Plaid Cymru in Westminster. Welcome to you both. Let me start with you, Clive. There seems to be a growing sense that Lord Mandelson must not only leave the House of Lords, but should also face criminal investigation into what's happened. What do you think?
Certainly a criminal investigation, yes. I mean, I think it's extraordinary that he even thought it was appropriate to come back. He must have known some of these things were likely to come out, if not all. So it's an extraordinary set of decisions that he's made along the way. But the key thing, I think, is that the decision was made ultimately by the Prime Minister to appoint him as our ambassador in Washington.
Not a good decision.
Not a good decision, but based on what? Who advised him? Because I don't expect him to do his own due diligence. That's done by people around him and people who advise him. And what questions were asked, what answers were gained, and what was the information that was put in front of the Prime Minister?
I mean, the trouble is that, as we both know, Peter Mandelson has a huge, as it were, crew of former employees, people he's been close to, still inside Whitehall, still inside Number 10.
Yes, I think that's true, and I think that maybe blindsided them to what was staring them in the face. But that needs to come out.
It needs to come out. And what did you think when you saw some of the stuff that Peter Mandelson was passing to Jeffrey Epstein in the middle of the financial crisis, when he was actually a member of Gordon Brown's cabinet?
Staggering, absolutely staggering. It's jaw-dropping that
really
anyone that at that level in government can think that that's appropriate. And from what I've seen, and it's all very, very recent, do it in a very matter-of-fact way in text messages. This is incredibly important stuff.
Liz, were you as surprised as Clive?
Well, in all honesty, I think many of us who've been watching Peter Mandelson's career over the years would have wondered, would it have ended in any other way? Who could have foreseen this? And it regardless of the fact that, of course, the Prime Minister would have been advised, somebody else would have done due diligence, I guess, in appointing Peter Mandelson as the ambassador to the USA, and also in appointing him to the House of Lords. But where was the Prime Minister's judgment in this, and those who were advising him as well? So the question's now being asked, and we just referred now, of course, to what it appears that Peter Mandelson did back at the time of the financial crash, and then he was part of Gordon Brown's government. The question is being asked, is this misconduct in public office? And the reason why we have to ask these questions is because otherwise the public just have this drip feed of losing confidence in those people who are supposed to be the figureheads, the active leaders in our democratic institutions. And if these start collapsing, then our democratic institutions are called into question as well. The Prime Minister promised when he came into power in 2024 that it would be the end of the Tory sleaze and the never-ending churn of controversies. And now he is himself immersed in controversy. He really needs to take the lead on this in terms of the Lords as well as whether there should be a criminal investigation.
So what would you like him to say to the House of Commons the next time he is there himself, standing in front of the dispatch box? What does he need to say?
That they are gathering together the evidence and working with the Metropolitan Police to see whether there is a need for an investigation into misconduct in public office.
And would you also like to see that, Clive?
Well, I'd like to see that, but I also want a thorough investigation into what's gone on inside Number 10, because Liz has just alluded to it. The Prime Minister's judgment is being called into question, and that can only be cleared by a trail of who knew what and when.
Are you both not using the words, but thinking of the words Morgan McSweeney at this point?
I wouldn't name any individuals, but those people who are close to that process of decision-making need to be investigated, to be given a clean bill of health, if nothing else, because this really does hit at the root of our democracy. It damages us all. It's not just Keir Starmer and the Labour Party or whatever.
But I would seriously not like this to be the next news cycle event, and that Morgan McSweeney carries the can for that. There are far more serious questions here at hand. Ironically, the government can appoint people to the House of Lords, but they can't, as I said earlier on, get rid of them in the same way. There are so many serious questions that goes beyond one individual.
You would think it needs to be easier to remove people from the House of Lords who need to be removed.
Yes, indeed.
Absolutely. And you said there's more serious matters here. Is there something in the culture of the way that we're governed, the culture of Downing Street, that needs to be rethought, do you think?
There's just one thing here. The fact that the evidence that we found has come from the sources, Epstein sources, the Epstein files in the United States. And it appears that the emails and the correspondence that would be the equivalent to this side in the United Kingdom has gone in the meantime. That worries me.
Absolutely fascinating. OK, Liz, Clive, thank you both very much indeed for coming in. It's a really solemn evening, actually.
It is.
Now, there's been a sharp drop across the capital in the demand for schools, according to a new report from Labour councils. What is going on, and does it reflect a shrinking of the school population throughout the UK? Let's talk first to Ian Edwards, the London Borough Council's executive member for children and schools and the leader of Hillingdon Council. Thank you so much for coming in.
Good evening.
Just give us a sense of the drop in registrations for schools in London.
Well, in primary schools, we've seen now nearly a decade of decline, and we're approaching in total some 50,000 loss of places, which we are forecasting through to the end of this decade. And that's quite substantial, but it isn't evenly spread. It is quite focused towards inner London. It's biased towards southwest London. And some authorities where there's been housing growth has actually seen an increase.
OK, but in inner London in particular, quite dramatic. If this is not funded differently, are we going to see lots of schools closing?
Certainly we will see some schools closing. We've already seen 90, I think somewhere in the region of 90 schools closing. These are predominantly primary schools, and that can be through amalgamation where a school falls off the register, as well as complete closure and closure of the site. We can expect to see other single form entry primary schools coming under that pressure if the funding model doesn't change. The government is standing to make some £45 million worth of saving over the next 4 years because of the forecast in pupil numbers. I believe that money should be set aside and ring-fenced for a hardship fund to maintain the schools, because we can see demand growing if housing growth picks up.
Well, it comes really down to why we think this is happening. Is this people leaving London, or is it a demographic problem across the whole country?
There's a few issues. Key is the decline in birth rates, and so this is pretty common across the UK. There's also been a decline in the number of people in state schools. So we've seen people leave London to go to other regions or leave the state school sector altogether, with an increase in homeschooling. And we have seen over the last decade a return of European nationals who were living in London into their home states.
Given all of that, isn't it wrong actually to maintain so many schools, quite big schools, that aren't actually needed? In other words, isn't this the moment for a bit of brutal cut and reorganisation?
If this was to be the bottom, I would agree. But actually, the Mayor of London is committed to build 880,000 homes in the next decade. Well, even if he was to achieve half of that, 440,000, that's another 110,000 primary school places will be needed in London, which exceeds the reduction we've seen. So we need to be thinking about the future, and we need to be protecting the school estate.
Is there another way of organising education for kids? In other words, not necessarily having exactly as many children or as many children and all of those teachers and all of those facilities? Is it possible to do some of it online and at home in different ways? How radically can we think?
I would be prepared for a radical conversation, but I'm not the one to best inform education. I'm not an educationalist, and really that needs to be discussed with others. But certainly making better use of modern technologies, I would expect all businesses, all endeavours and services to be adapting to that.
Well, there we are. It's a big issue for London, certainly we haven't talked about before. So thank you very much indeed for coming in. And as we discussed there, this is not just a London story. It's an issue facing schools around the country. And to talk about that, I'm joined now by Luke Subieta, Research Fellow at the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who has been exploring this problem nationwide. Luke, are we running out of children?
Well, there are certainly fewer children, and the birth rate is declining faster than we can keep expecting it. The ONS keeps expecting the birth rate to stabilise, and it keeps going down. And that's been the major factor shaping the decline in the number of children over the last decade. And we've seen bigger falls in inner London, but that's spreading across the country. So we're starting to see falls, particularly amongst the primary school age children in the northeast, but we've seen falls in Scotland and Wales and in many rural areas as well. It's UK-wide phenomenon that's going to keep going.
Well, I know rural Scotland quite well, and I do know that there are lots of very valued, very loved local schools which are closing for this reason. And again, I come back to the question I was asking you just now as to whether there are different ways of organising education. You know, in the world of online education, so many resources are available electronically. Are we going to have to make do with different kinds of schools with perhaps fewer teachers, but the subjects covered in front of computer screens?
Well, I think we've got to face up to it in a really grown-up way. So there are going to be fewer children, and that's just going to be the way the shape of society and the state is changing. And the policymakers and schools essentially face a choice. Do we maintain spending and have smaller classes and perhaps have fewer curriculum choices within schools, or do we go down the reorganisation route of, say, having fewer numbers of schools? That can work in urban areas like London. As you say, it's a bit more difficult in rural areas. In
rural areas, it means, frankly, busing. It means picking kids up and then, really an hour's journey to get to school, an hour's journey back. It can be very disruptive.
No, exactly. And I live in Wales, and I'm very familiar with the way that the school sector is changing, because there are many secondary schools with sixth forms that are just not really feasible anymore. And that's leading to children being bused all around the country. But we kind of got to face up to how the population has changed. And that might mean reorganising services. It might mean a bit of online learning, but it might also mean reorganising other parts of the state. So co-locating things like GP surgeries in schools, nurseries, or other wider social services, so that schools still have a role within a community.
Absolutely. Well, the shape of the country is changing, Luke. Thank you very much indeed for helping us with that. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the LBC app, where you can also stay up to date with all the latest news and videos and opinion. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew.
Peter Mandelson should not retain his membership of the House of Lords or use his title.
Peter Mandelson may have quit the Labour Party, but he's still in the House of Lords, and the process of booting him out is very complicated. The Prime Minister is asking the Tories to help get Mandelson out of Parliament for good, but should he be doing more? And should the